All right, hello, everybody. Welcome to December's Word Up, the last Word Up of 2021. Can you guys hear me okay? To begin, we of Word Up acknowledge that some of us are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabeg and Huron-Wendat people. Word Up is dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. We share in the heartbreak of those impacted by the discoveries of children in unmarked graves at residential schools, giving this acknowledgement much deeper significance to us. So tonight we have a short story writing panel. We are joined by panelist Bruce Meyer, author of more than 68 books. Hey, Bruce. We are also joined by award-winning author Bruce Hanson and fiction and nonfiction writer Lori Twining, here to tell us what makes short stories necessary and special, and they'll share some of their work. We ask that the Zoom audience members click to raise a hand and unmute during the question period, and our live audience can actually raise a hand. So we are going to begin with an introduction from Bruce Meyer. Thanks.
Hi. No, you're going to say something, okay?
Okay, hold on one second, Bruce. I'm just going to spotlight you so everybody can see you.
Did you want me to introduce myself or?
Yes, please.
Okay, hi. Good evening. My name is Bruce Meyer. I'm coming to you from Barrie, from the Anishinaabeg and Wendat lands. And, I'm glad to be here this evening. I'm reading to you tonight from my most recent book. I see if I, no, it doesn't want to appear. It's called Toast Soldiers. And it's a book of short stories, I guess. It's my 68th book. I've published, I guess, 4 since this time last year, and 1 in Nigeria. And I've got 10 more signed and coming out next year. So they're all finished. So I'm delighted to be here. I love writing short stories. I came to short stories as I suppose, an afterthought. I'd been writing poetry for years. And every time I ask someone, is there a mystery to short, or what should I know about short stories? They'd say, oh, the craft of fiction, all this stuff. And they'd pull this mysterious gobbledygook on me. And really, when it comes down to writing short stories, it's just like sitting around a table, family dining room table, and relating an event from the past, or sharing with people around the table a story, or that has a point or a joke or some sort of revelation to it, and so forth. So I was also in a car accident in 2015 after coming from Mexico the day before, and I was in a very serious car accident, and I lost the ability to read for 4 months. And in order to bring myself back, I started writing flash fiction. And the stories became longer and longer and longer and longer. So all of the stories that are in Toast Soldiers have been written since 2015. So that's essentially where they're at. I love telling stories. Anybody who knows me well, has ever sat down to eat with me, has heard me sort of, carry on a lot, and possibly too much. But I love telling stories, and these are all stories about people who find themselves on the verge of challenges and are wrestling with crises in their lives and so forth. The protagonists are men in this book. There's a book of the same publisher has where the protagonists are women. I've been wrestling with the question of, should I be telling stories from women? And I keep thinking, well, most of the stories I heard growing up were from women in my family. My mother, my grandmother were great storytellers. Even my aunts, that would sit around the dining room table at Sunday dinners, and they would tell us stories. So some of the stories in the next book are true. But in any case, the stories in Toast Soldiers all have an element of veracity to them. And I happen to believe that the seed or the kernel at the core of a short story is some sort of element of what is true. And if you start with that notion of veracity, you can build the story from there. The story wants to head off in its own direction, let it. But you've at least started, given it a point of origin. And that point of origin is very, very important. So I hope that's useful to you. Over to you, back to you, or?
Hold on a sec. So Bruce Meyer, did you want to do a reading while you're here for just
Sure.
5 minutes?
I'll read you the shortest story. I should be able to get the whole story in. It's the shortest story in Toast Soldiers, and it's titled Sayings. Now, the interesting thing about sayings is that, you know, if you go into antique shops, one of the things you'll notice everywhere are mottos that have been hand stitched that people used to hang on the wall. My grandmother was a big fan of mottos. She had mottos on everything, like for the cream pitcher, you know, the candlestick, you know. If I ate my dinner, there was a motto waiting for me underneath, and so forth. They're conveyances of wisdom. They're also catchphrases and easy sayings. So this story is titled Sayings. I told my father I devised a new saying about the old rusting red tractor with its chuffing chimney and bobbing exhaust cap he'd given me to learn on. Okay, he said, let's hear it. An old tractor is does as good a job as a new one that won't. Needs some work, he said. More pith, less explanation. He went back to tinkering with the motor on his new machine. I thought my saying wasn't bad. I'd grown up around sayings, and there is a saying for everything. My grandmother loved to stitch sayings in needlepoint and having them around the house. A saying that was too long or convoluted confounded her. She'd look up from her threads and frame and ask, who thought this one up? There is a saying, you cannot plow the same field 3 years in a row and expect a good crop. There's another saying that when the soil turns gray, so does a man's hair, even a young man. Inside the front door, there was bless this house. And behind the door was may the roads rise with you and the wind be always at your back. My father used to chuckle that she'd left out the part about being half an hour in heaven before the devil knows you're dead. In the dining room, she hung, bless these fruits. Though the soil was so poor, we couldn't even coax raspberries from that dust. My childhood favorite was early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. She hung that bedtime sampler over my headboard, the way some people put crucifixes on a wall or dangle dream catchers from the ceiling to catch the haunting replays of bad moments from the day. She said it was a reminder for me to go to sleep. I am a natural nighthawk. I'd lie awake and listen to hard rock from a distant FM radio station. Opposite the front door, opposite the foot of my bed, so it would be the first thing I saw each morning, was the prayer recited by alcoholics at AA meetings when they ask to be granted the serenity to accept the things they cannot change and the wisdom to know the difference. My mother was afraid. I might hit the bottle if we had a bad season, and the farm was seized. I wanted to tell her there would never been enough money left over even even in a good season for someone to imbibe. Just about everything that sounded wise could make its way onto one of her samplers. Stitching the mottos was stitching the mottos of what farm women did after they had done everything else to keep the domestic matters running in their households. She did all our laundry by hand and prepared every meal from scratch and cleaned the rooms from top to bottom 2 times a week. When she was young, my grandmother had won prizes at the county fair, when there was a county fair, for her needlework and the sayings that seemed to flow from her mind. She had been educated in a one-room schoolhouse. I doubt she had ever read Shakespeare, though there was a Shakespearean twist to her maxims. She knew the Proverbs by heart, as well as every line from Ecclesiastes and the other books of wisdom. The Song of Solomon, however, was not to be quoted. Those men got carried away with their talk of beloveds, she said. The Bible is no place for the sort of language that gets talked about behind the barn. Her explanation of the Song of Solomon was that something I would have been proud to hang in my room. My grandmother was so proficient at homespun philosophy and stitchery that she was celebrated at meetings of the Ladies' Auxiliary. There was a time when her needlework was in demand. Even after mottos and samplers went out of fashion, she was still able to sell a few. The letters were decorative, oversized capitals adorned with enormous serifs. One preacher said that the top of her letters were perches for angels. In her lifetime, however, everything had changed. There had been two wars, and in between those conflicts, the soil had dried out and blown away in the eastern sky. The wars should have broken her spirit. The first war carried off her brothers. The second took her sons, except for my father, her youngest. Her face became dry and lined. I thought of her when I touched our soil. The life was slowly fading from it. We could see it happening, but could do nothing about it. We can't even grow a gourd for God to smite us, my father said. An ancestor homesteaded our spread in the 1850s. He was lured by the vision of lush, rolling hills and fabled riches. There were minor stumps he had to pull, scrub growth that needed to be cleared away, but the topsoil was good to him. For 6 generations, life was bountiful. Then the dry years hit. The topsoil blew away, but we survived. Though what I saw in my grandmother's face was exhaustion from a long battle, a pity for the depleted dust, as if the earth were holding a conversation. The deeper she asked the roots of our new wheat to reach, the deeper we sank in debt to the banks and the government plans. She read the dire warnings in the almanacs, but never believed them. My father knew the truth in all of its tangled complications, but refused to believe it. In many ways, he was the worst kind of farmer, the optimist who says the next good year was just around the corner. He said he could coax one or more good season from the land, and when that passed, and when we had nothing to show for it, next year would be better. He would repeat his saying, where gold grows and ripens, gold lies hidden below. I don't know where he got the money, but one day a flatbed arrived and unloaded a bright new harvester with an enormous cab and a radio built into the dashboard. He did not have, how did we come by that? I asked. His reply was that the new tractor meant I could work alongside him. Our old machine had been purchased by his father 40 years before, and sooner or later would give up the ghost. But my father believed it was still sturdy enough for me to learn how to handle. Besides, he said, if you're going to find gold, you'd better be prepared to spend gold. My father's new tractor had a glassed-in cab. The motor inside, the motor made a steady but soothing roar, while the machine I inherited growled and ached as if it was shouting at the field. But the old tractor had been part of the land so long, I knew it was trying to coax the dead soil back to life. Anyone could see the land was dying. Year by year, it paled and grew to death. I was determined to learn the mechanics because I understood the new tractor would only last until the bank seized it. It was bought with money we'd borrowed, and we couldn't pay it back. My father was going all in, all or nothing. I'd heard him say when we played cards on the darkened porch, and the beetles and the beetles chewing at the tufts filled me with a sense of foreboding. His excuse for buying the new machine was that now I could learn to plow. My father had a saying, a man has to feel the soil before the soil will give him life from his labors. So I was proud of on those late spring mornings when we set off together in our machines, the two of us abreast, he gliding over the landscape with his harvester's fine suspension, and me on the ride as bumpy as a ball machine in a bar. I wore ear coverings, orange cups that looked as if they could play music but didn't. To pass the hours of tedious straight plowing, I listened to Led Zeppelin in my head sometimes, and sometimes bobbed to the beat of Kashmir or the throb of Stairway to Heaven. Our farm was remote and far from everything I wanted to be part of. I got so used to wrapping myself in a world of my own devising, I stopped paying attention. In the sunlight of a spring morning, the rolling fields without a tree in sight are beautiful and hypnotic. The rising and the falling horizon can lull a person into a false sense of tranquility. When I looked at our land, brown and holding the moisture from the final snows of winter and the measly spring rains that pursued the melting, I saw not only the land as it was, but the land as it could be, as wind moved its hand over the stalks of wheat, and I could see the imprint of its passing. I thought I was good at plowing. When we reached the turn at the end of the field, I pulled away from my father and the machine and drifted off in his machine and drifted off into a reverie. Every bump, every tug, and even the smell of the exhaust told me how the old red Reliable was doing. For the first time in my life, I felt proud of who I was. I didn't want to run away from the farm or myself. I pictured my father, elderly and paunchy, sitting on the porch as I'd come in from plowing and hear him say, "You did good." He would raise his glass of lemonade and say, "Man's labor shows in his soul." My grandmother would not stitch that. Her time would have passed. But just the same, I could feel his faith in me, and I was proud to be his son. That day, I'd have something to do. That day, I'd have something to kid him about. I'd say how he fell behind and needed to keep up. My father had halted his machine. He was wearing a brown barn coat because it was cool first thing in the day. Maybe he had bent down to inspect the soil, or maybe he had hopped off his rig because he thought there was something wrong, something dry and dead about the land that he wanted to see for himself. I didn't see him. I was gazing at the horizon. A flock of birds circled the hill on the east side of our farm. I swear I didn't see him. Maybe I was distracted by the empty seat in his harvester. I can't remember what happened next. The coroner said I shouldn't blame myself. The county investigator said my father put his machine on idle and jumped down from the cab to see what was wrong with the motor, perhaps a snag in the blades of the tiller. When he bent over, for whatever reasons, he suffered a fatal stroke. One of the inspectors hinted my father had been conscious in the end, but immediately took it back and said, not knowing the truth is a gift of the angels, he said, phrasing his words as a saying. I live with the hope my father was dead before my tiller tore into him. And even if he had been alert enough to see me coming when I didn't see him sprawled on the ground, we were too far from the house to get help. And even if I had not run over him, there was nothing I could have done to save him. I live with the truth. He may still have been alive. His blood mingled with the soil. And that year, our final good one, the farm had a bumper crop. It was like he always said, land doesn't mean anything unless you give your life to it. So that is sayings. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. That was great. A surprise ending on that one. I was not expecting that. So who would like to go next? Okay, so I'm going to unspotlight you. Hold on one second. Remove spotlight. And if Bruce Meyer, you can mute your mic, make sure it's muted. And then Bruce Hanson is going to come up and oh yes, thank you. Got to remember to spotlight myself. Spotlight for everybody. Okay, there we go. It's all yours.
And is this because I'm so short, or do we take that out of the way? I'm going to start off by reading something and then work that in, tell you a little bit about my background and how I got here. The first thing, partly tongue in cheek, but it was originally just supposed to be Bruce Meyer and myself, and the evening was going to be called The Night of the Two Bruces. For any of you who are old like me and remember Monty Python, we had another person join the campfire down there in Australia, Lori, and so to keep things simple, we're just going to call you Bruce. So the first, what I'm going to read are very, well, from 3 different short stories of varying lengths. And because short stories span a whole, from less than 100 words up to maybe 10,000 words, 20,000 words, still considered a short story. So this will just give you a sample. This is the first page from a 1,000-word short story called The Order. Because you can't get through the whole thing tonight, I will tell you it's about a cult, and it's about the trade-off of values. The Order. Secrecy and loyalty. Jonas lived according to these 2 twin virtues. He searched for even one reason why Silesia had violated them. It was ironically fitting and terrifying that he would have to remedy this situation. Step forward. His voice echoed in the stark hall. Silesia did not move. I have a new life outside the community. Silesia, the Order has ruled that you have broken our code. The Order only binds us to exclusion. Jonas seized. The Order has announced your punishment. The ritual will cleanse you. The ritual only delivers pain. I will not participate. Her voice, flat, emotionless, as if discussing a grocery list, triggered a warm flush on Jonas's cheeks. A reaction he hoped the dim lighting would hide. He forced his clenched fingers to straighten. In his 2 years as administrator of the ritual of cleansing, he had never been challenged. The possibility of applying the force of loyalty had never been a consideration. Yet the questions spinning through his mind, eroding his confidence, weren't because of what he was confronting. They were because of whom he was confronting. Jonas studied every feature of the face he knew so well, but was no longer able to see the woman behind it, a woman whose thoughts had once been as clear to him as his own. His muscles and resolve tightened. He had a duty to perform. Page 1. The second short story I'll read is very short and would be classified by some people, everybody likes names on things, as nanofiction. It's under 100 words and was written for a story starter contest run by the Writers Conference of Ontario, I believe. I don't think they're around anymore. But in any case, this contest, and I didn't find out about it until November, so I entered it in November, December of that year. They posted a picture of a piece of art by a local artist, I suppose local to Ontario, or maybe Canada. And you were to write a maximum of 100 words based on inspiration of this piece of art. So I entered twice, and they selected top three in their opinion out of each month. And this was in the top third, I think in December, in the top three. I went on to the convention where the attendees voted. I didn't win. That's sad, but I made the short list. 36 entries, it's a pretty long short list. But so here's the art. I apologize, it's not in color. I don't know if you can see it. I'll put it here for the people on the screen and then hold up a little higher. It's a little bizarre. My printer ran out of color toner, so you got the black and white version. So here it is. The story is called Body Art. Few of the original strain remain, fewer every year. Genetically modified, our resistance to disease is now inbred. Prenatal options are extensive. Post-birth alterations unlimited, and for the most part, unrestricted. Regulations, however, do not allow the removal of the individualistic nature of our brains, so creativity, innovation, and subjectivity flourish. While plastic and ink enabled our ancestors to sculpt and paint their exterior, gene manipulation addresses the complete being. Self-expression has become rampant. Some view us as freaks, others as living, evolving works of art. The vanguard has always felt scrutiny. So it's a look into the future for CRISPR technology and gene splitting. This last page and a little bit is from a 3,000-word short story called The Dreamer, with a subtitle For Emily, Whenever I May Find Her, which is the title of a Paul Simon song sung by Art Garfunkel. It's a beautiful, beautiful poem and song. And one of the characters in the story is called Emily, by no coincidence. This is a story of unrequited love. I held her once. While I did, the lyrics to Paul Simon's song ran through my head in a continuous loop. The protagonist woke from a dream to find his lover beside him. He embraced her honey hair with thankful tears. Girl, I love you. I told my buddy Jim I only wanted to get her into bed. If that had been true, I wouldn't have hurt so much. To be honest, I was totally in love, incorrigibly in love, indisputably beyond hope. Isn't that the bitch of it? My car wouldn't start. I was bent over the engine like a dog burying its head in a food bowl. And there she stood, not 10 feet away, grinning at the sound of me cursing. She saw me bang my head on the hood when I stood up and heard me swear again. As soon as I refocused, my heart stopped. My mind froze. I ran a sleeve across my mouth, mopping away saliva leaking from the corner. She smiled, held my eyes with hers, and then tossed mine away with a roll and a blink. Ouch. She headed up the street toward the Maddie Center. And what did I do? I stood motionless on the curb like a statue, waiting for pigeons. I watched her disappear from my sight. I often thought about her, planning what I would say if I saw her again, thinking about how she would answer me and how I would take her in my arms and how she would finally kiss me. 3 months of living contently in my imagination. Daydreams are wonderful things until they end. Living in the future of your own fiction is a drug. When reality crawls on top and inserts its life-size stinger, you desperately need to dull the pain of what is with more images of what might be. You become addicted to your fantasy. For 3 months, I was an addict. And it goes on from there. So how did I come around to getting to that point of writing these? It's a long journey. I'm an engineer by background. The only reason I went into engineering university because it was the only thing in the guidance counselor's office in terms of course I could find where you did not have to take English. Couldn't spell, still can't. Spell better, but it's not great. Wasn't a good reader, slow reader, didn't like reading. Especially the bigger, thicker the book, the less chance I was going to pick it up. I got through high school on Cole's Notes. It's the only way I could make it. Shakespeare, might as well been German, didn't understand it, different language. So I did read some things, comic books. It wasn't until into my 20s, I guess, I picked up a novel by Robert Ludlum. And what I'd been interested in, even when I did read, which would have been Hardy's Boy back in elementary school, that book just grabbed me. And it was over 500 pages. I mean, it was like, for me, being a nerdy engineering type, you know, that was like equivalent to lifting weights in a gym. 500 and some, yeah, long. Anyway, life goes on. And I decided I needed to work on creativity. In work, I chose a topic each year to work on in terms of personal development. So I sat down as an exercise and I wrote, and I found out I liked it. I didn't know what I was writing about, I just wrote. And that developed and turned into, well, when I started the second time, into a novel. I'm a pantser. I didn't know that then, but since I've taken courses, I've been labeled. I don't plot things out. I don't think about who the characters are. I just write the story, or the story writes itself. And then I go in and do the research and do the fleshing out the characters and throw out a bunch. Well, usually my editing group helps me throw out a bunch of stuff because, you know, to the writer, everything's too good to let go of. So where I am now is I've been fortunate that some of my short stories have been recognized in some smaller contests. No Giller Awards for this guy yet, but it's flattering that I have received some recognition. I was hoping to have 3 books published actually before today, but real life has its own plot twists and things have been delayed. But I'm hoping the 3 will start to appear at the end of January or beginning of February. One is ready to go. It took me a few months to get the rights from 3 companies and 2 continents to a very short piece of lyrics, which absolutely were not worth the effort or the money. But I was determined to get those in the book because they're just perfect. So anyway, I got them after a bit of a struggle. The first book that will probably come out in the new year will be a novella for young adult mystery story, which is more my genre of reading, mystery, intrigue, thriller. And it's already on Goodreads, just as an ARC. You can't read it, but reviews gone on, and I've got a 5-star, my first 5-star. So I'm pretty pleased about that. We'll see where else it goes. I've got 2 more reviews that will be going on shortly as well. One is a 5 and one is either a 4 or 5. So I've got feeling good about that. The second book that will probably be the second book coming out is my collection of short stories. It's a fairly short collection. And with it, I've strayed from my mystery roots. There's certainly some thriller, murders. There's also some of these which are quasi-literary almost, which is interesting because I do read some literary things, but it's not really my genre. It's not what I get into that much. But I have been accused of writing literary within this book. And then it goes from there to historical romance, a Pygmalion type Victorian story, which is the longest one in the book. So varied genres, varied lengths, hard to nail down exactly what type of writer I am. And then the third one to come out after that, and it's ready to go, it's already illustrated, is a children's story called Elephants in My Stew. And it's the prime poem in a collection of children's poems I've written, which have not been published yet as a book, which will be called Elephants in My Stew and Other Tidbits. But before that comes out, I have 2 other children's picture books that I would like to release first. And the first one's about a horse and a cow. And if you ever talk to an agent or a publisher in children's book, don't take anything about animals to them. They don't want to hear about it. And Franklin was a fluke. That's it. That's the guidance I've received. But I'm going to do it anyway. That's the great thing about independent publishing. And then the third one, which will be at least a year later, probably more than that, is one that my daughter helped. She gave me the idea based on something I said. And as we often do, I started writing children's stories first because I had little kids. And then I guess I switched to young adult because they grew up. And this last story is about a father and grandkids. So anyway, I cover the spectrum. I have a lot of fun writing. The writing part is the fun part. Unlike a lot of writers, I enjoy editing and I love the research. So I have to pull myself away from the screen sometimes because it interferes. And that's it. I'll pass it over to Bruce.
Okay, hello, how are you? I'm glad everyone showed up. Thank you for coming. Thanks for inviting me here. It's been good. I'm supposed to introduce myself and I've got nothing, so. One sec here. So what I will tell you is that I write fiction and nonfiction. And I belong to a lot of clubs. I do things like international thriller writers, sisters, writers of crime, sisters in crime. And I have a local group that I also go to with Ascribe Writing. And I also do Toronto romance writers, just to give me a little love in my stories. And so I'm a lover of books, sports, and sometimes people. And I like bird watching. I'm a hater of slithering reptiles and beady-eyed rodents. So that's me. And I was going to just tell you a little something about short stories that might help you, might not help you. I'm assuming that you're here because you're writers and that you want to write short stories or flash fiction, maybe novels. I actually started out writing novels and none have been published yet. I'm trying to be patient and make that work. But in the meantime, I take a couple days every now and then to do just short fiction. And how I come up with my ideas, people ask me this all the time. And there's so many ways to come up with ideas, but I'm going to give you a little tip on how to come up with something. Number one, if you had an image to look at, go to Google, type one word in there, that you are familiar with, whatever it is, whether it's surfboards, children, elephants, Bruce's, whatever you want. And all the images will come up and you just pick one. Bring it up as big as possible. You stare at it and just start writing tiny little tidbits of what's in the photo. Like, for instance, I was talking to Colleen earlier and I was mentioning that one of my stories was about a warehouse. And it was an abandoned warehouse with graffiti all over it. And it was actually a photo that Blank Spaces put in on their website. And basically they invite people to write 1,000 words, make a story, 1,000 words. Sounds easy, right? Well, 1,000 words is hard, actually. When you come into, you need a beginning, a middle, and an end. So when you have the photo, you just start writing randomly everything you can think of about that photo. So in this case, it was a warehouse, graffiti, colorful graffiti, and you want to be specific. You want to be very detailed. So, for instance, I mentioned a yellow penis. It was there, big yellow penis. It was probably Bruce's penis. I'm not sure. Anyway, and then, you know, just whatever is very specific. So when you start to develop all these things in a list, then you start to wonder, what kind of story can I tell? Who will be the person telling the story? So in my case, what I thought of first was, okay, we have the setting. Now I want to know what bad thing, I'm always thinking bad, what bad thing could happen in the warehouse? Like, so you meet there and you have what? A seance? Do you have, do you have chicken fights? Do you have, like, there could be lots of reasons you're there. But in my case, I had a father who was doing something illegal. So then I thought the best way to tell a story, should I use the father's point of view or could I use the son's point of view? So I used a 12-year-old boy who followed his dad one night from home. So in the meantime, his mom's sick at home. He wanted to know where his dad was disappearing to. So he follows him there. And I was very specific on how he got to the warehouse. So you use the town that you want to use. Like I used a real town, Georgetown. And then like he rode a bike. It was a blue bike. It was a rusted bike and where he parked his bike. So you'd be very specific on this. And then when he gets in there, make sure you use all your 5 senses. So you want to know smell, taste, like everything. And you're doing all your little point forms and you're only going to pull out some really poetic ones or some very specific smells. Obviously, there's probably going to be urine in there. There's going to be dead mice. There's just like all kinds of things that you're going to step on. And then when he got in there, I made him a little terrified because it's dark. He hears noises, and you're wondering what is going on. The reader wants to know what's going on in there and what's the dad doing in there, right? So they're continuously reading. Again, you only have 1,000 words. So once he got there, he heard all the screaming, then he would hear cheering. So he wiggled through all the crowd to find out what was going on. So here is basically, it's an underground fighting thing happening. And people are bidding on who the winner is going to be. So this boy's father is getting beat up and he's down on the ground, he's bleeding. The son is freaking out because, my mom's dying, now my dad's dying. He had a little meltdown, so he goes running home. So in the end of the story, I'm going to blow it for you, just so you know. In the end of the story, he's at home crying. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't want to tell his mom where he was, but she'll know because she can smell certain things on him. She knows he's crying, all this stuff. The dad comes home and he's got this wad of money. And what happens is you find out later that he basically took a dive to get the money and he slides the money into an envelope and he writes one word on the envelope. And the envelope, does anyone know what the word might have been? No, you do. So the word was rent. And that's how the story ends. It's just R-E-N-T. And so that everyone feels so sorry for what's happening. Anyway, and so you get this emotional thing with the kid and the dad, and you just don't know, and you know he's being illegal, doing something bad, but now you know the reason. So with that little example, what I'm trying to tell you is that you can still have your beginning, middle, and end, but it's still just a snippet of time. It's like one little thing that happens. It was like maybe 2 hours of time that took place, and a lot happened in 2 hours. So anyway, I just want to give you that tip. Other ways to think of your story is other photos. So you use Google, get the photos, think of the worst possible case could happen, and just start writing something along those lines. And then one other tip is, I don't suggest this, but I do this, is that I overwrite whatever the word count is. I at least double the word count, and then I work backwards to get to my 1,000. So if it's 1,000 words, I'm doing at least 2,000, 3,000 words. And then I cut out the things that are not important, and only the stuff that is really amazing, like makes you visually see what's happening. Like you're watching a movie, only keep that stuff. So limit your descriptions to the main thing. Like I said, you know, it works well. So now I'll just give a tiny reading about, this is a story that I wrote recently, and funny story. I entered a contest with this story and I was a loser. I did not win gold, silver, or bronze. It was, anyway, but what happened was the editor sent me this email and said, the judges love this so much, except for it's so unique and not what we wanted for that. We would like to publish it in our magazine. And I'm like, what? So anyway, long story short, it is in the December issue of Blank Spaces magazine. It's a Canadian literary magazine. So I'm going to read just a 4-minute piece, and I'm going to end in the middle of a sentence. So don't be mad, but that's what I'm going to do. If you want to read the rest, you could get it for $5 on the Blank Spaces website. Okay, so here we go. The title of the story is called Enduring Traditions. I'm going to do this. Okay, hopefully you can hear me okay. The three of us had no other choice but to trail Mom around the front yard as she pounded multiple blue spotlights into the ground with Dad's old ball-peen hammer. Being the oldest, I offered to do the job, but she insisted she would do it this time, and we should watch to know how to do it next time. I wondered if I should record this and post it to YouTube so everyone in Owen Sound could share in the Yuletide spirit. When I mentioned this, she wrapped herself in Dad's old knitted reindeer sweater and she ugly cried. I knew I pushed things too far. My two brothers and I dropped chunks of scrap plywood over the spider web of extension wires snaking out from underneath the front porch, leading to the life-size nativity scene. Mary and Joseph, along with some sheep, a donkey, and a French bulldog. They sat out front, center, covering the sidewalk leading to the front door. Our lawn, full of scrap wood, wires, and decorations, could now pass for Sherman Construction's yard over on 24th Avenue West. I worried that the yuppie neighbors' kids might throw firecrackers into the straw and start a fire. They still weren't too fond of my mom and her early Saturday morning violin lessons. Grandma mentioned it was Mom's coping mechanisms at work. I think Mom should just partake in marijuana-laced brownies like the other moms on the street. At least the house would smell good. As per Dad's instructions, it was tradition that baby Jesus would sleep beside the pizza pans in the cupboard above the fridge and not be carried outside to the manger until midnight on Christmas Eve. My last year's girlfriend, Ashley, said, "Why is your dad singing church songs to a doll wrapped in a tea towel?" I shrugged. I said, "What child is this? Is one of his favorite songs." I expected this would answer her question. She just blinked at me. Mom had no religious blood in her veins, but she said we were doing this for Dad. The manger full of fresh straw, the mannequins dressed like shepherds, and the animals with paint peeling off their foreheads. He would want all the electrical wires covered just in case it snowed. Tonight was a chilly autumn night with the fog rolling in from Georgian Bay. It wouldn't snow. It was an understatement to say my family's favorite time of year was Christmas. Under Dad's influence, Chevy Chase had become a legend in our household. National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation was viewed every year leading up to a night like tonight. Mom was determined to have an old-fashioned family Christmas, minus the hillbilly cousins, the SWAT team, and everyone being held up at gunpoint. And it would be without Dad. Mom said, "It's time, wait here." We stood beside the paved road, watching for headlights to appear out of the thick foggy mist, while Mom ran through the dark to the porch. She hit the button on the old boom box from Dad's workbench in the garage. Bing Crosby's "I'll Be Home for Christmas" played through the haze. I grabbed my cell phone and recorded this for her to watch as many times as she wanted. Mom yelled, 3, 2, 1, "Merry Christmas." She squatted and turned on the industrial power strip with a dozen outlets. My first thought is that we still have over a month to go before Christmas arrives. But since it is the opening night for the Festival of Northern Lights, I'll let it go. Tradition overrules everything else. An electric hum buzzed through the yard. 1 million LED fairy lights cut through the cloudy haze of the night. My stomach clenched at the sight of the magical, misty scene. It was almost as bright as the Rogers Center during Blue Jays game. Dad would be so proud of us. The strings of lights circled the trunks of every single tree in the yard. I think Mom was trying to replicate their wedding photo of her and Dad dancing in the streets of Las Vegas. I crossed my fingers. Mom wouldn't blow a fuse. I'm really not sure any of us knew how to fix that problem. I should add that to the list of things I need to figure out before leaving for university next year. Mom smiled, snorted out a sad laugh while she wiped the tears from her cheeks. She waved us toward the backyard. "Let's go, we don't have much time." So the dense tendrils of fog hovered along the steep banks of the Sydenham River. We ventured down to the water edge, Mom leading the way with the lightweight, and the end. I can't tell you the rest. Oh, anyway, what I forgot to tell you, which I probably left over there. Anyway, that particular story, the editor came up with, this is what she described this as. She said, "It's a tender moment of remembrance between a widow and her children as they work together to keep the memory of their loved one alive through the holidays." When I heard that, I was like, wow, is that what my story's about? Because when you write the story, sometimes you don't know. I mean, I knew that she was a widow, and I knew that her children were suffering, and they were, upset that their dad's not there now, and that Mom really, she's struggling. Mom's struggling. They know she's struggling. They're struggling. And I was trying to capture that moment of how to go on when your dad's no longer there. And I myself have never experienced that, but I have experienced where people have been missing from my life now. And it's very sad. And so I'm trying to capture that. So you'd have to read the rest to get what the ending is. So I think I'm all done, Colleen.
And of course, you were referring to the other Bruce,
I
right?
was.
Okay, everybody, we're going to take 1 second just to move the laptop over there, and then we're going to start our panel. So give us 1 moment. So can we see you guys on there?
Yes. I don't want to touch your stuff though. Oof. It is on speaker view.
It is on speaker.
Yeah, but
Okay.
where is Bruce? Oh, he's
Bruce
up
is
there.
here, but he's not talking right now.
Okay,
Okay, so.
he's waving. Do you have to sit here to switch,
Switch what?
like when Bruce talks?
No, it should do.
Speaker view should change it.
Whoever's
Okay,
whoever's
okay.
talking, it should go on that.
Mhm.
So you guys are gonna have to repeat the questions though, because you guys have the mic. The question we have is, do you approach short stories differently than longer pieces such as a novel?
Repeat the question.
Yeah.
Okay, the first question we have is, do you approach short stories differently than a longer piece such as a novel?
Do you want to go first, Bruce?
Sure. I think the answer would be, for me, not really, except if there was a difference, I approach a novel more hesitantly. Because the work involved can span, especially if you're not 100% full-time writing, can take a year, 2 years, 3 years, or more. When you're writing short stories, it's kind of today's mode. It's instant gratification, at least for me. I know I can get through it, whether it's a day or a week, maybe more, but it's not that long of a time. In terms of the actual process, the differences come into play once the story's written for me. And one of the things that Lori said, I find very valuable. And if I wasn't such a lazy writer, I'd do it more often. But that's one of the reasons I like contests and putting stuff into contests, because you take something you've written, you can either write for the contest, or you take something you've written and you say, wow, I think this is a good story. I think it's a fit for the contest, but it's, 12, 1,300 words and the limit's 1,000 words. Perfect. My rule of thumb is you can knock off 20% of anything you've written and keep the story whole, and it will be better. That applies to novels as well, though. So from a pure approach, and I think that was the wording, wasn't it?
Down here.
Yeah. Do you approach the short stories differently? No, not really. And now that I've written all the one thing, I've only written one novel and one novella. Both of those were written with absolutely no idea, pure pantser style. I just sat down and wrote, and one chapter followed the other, and the story came together. It took a long, long time after that to edit, re-edit, expand, contract. Whereas short stories now, I started off writing them with nothing in my head. I usually start with an idea now in terms of a short story. And that could come from something in life, or Stephen King writes, he asks a question. So for one example, I'd listened to a daughter of an acquaintance over dinner talk about, and she was up from the States, the horrible situation she was in where her ex was stalking her and her daughters. And I said, one day I'm going to write a story on that. And that's what I did. So in terms of approach, that would be the only difference. With short stories, I now use a prompt more often than I used to for anything.
The short story, as I see it, is, first of all, I've got 5 novels in outline, and my wife says I can't write them until we move. So she would kill me if I was right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. She would kill me if I started writing novels. But here's the key thing. The novels are made out of short stories. This is what I think people don't realize, that if you take a look at some of the classic novels of the 20th century, things like, like William Faulkner's Go Down Moses, As I Lay Dying, The Sound and the Fury, and so forth, they're basically a bunch of short story collections all stitched together. They're a bunch of short stories stitched together. I think that it's hard to separate them out because if you go right back to the origins of what's a novel and what's a short story, the origins of literature point to something like the Odyssey by Homer, which is made up of episodes. And the episodes are the length of time a human voice could sustain song. And they're all, in fact, sorted together. They don't, in fact, have a continuous flow. There are, in fact, moments, poignant moments of concentrated narrative, of concentrated focus, of selected information. And that sense of focus is what exists in the short story. So that the 19th century short story, people in hands like people like Poe, for example, arose out of the novel because they thought, well, we can't run a whole novel in the Baltimore Star, but we can run pieces of a novel. Like Dickens, all his novels were serialized and so forth in British newspapers. So someone like Poe comes along and says, well, why don't we just have individual self-standing episodes? And that's where Poe's short stories come from. The modern short story comes from Chekhov when he was writing, vignettes and so forth. I think maybe he thought maybe this someday they'd make a really good novel, but instead he turned them into really good plays. And the whole idea of the Chekhovian vignette is practiced by someone like Morley Callahan. And it's the idea of focusing on a particular event or a particular idea. So I don't see that there's a huge difference. I think it's all a matter of laying things end to end and seeing if they form a larger sort of picture out of the whole thing. So.
Sure. Yep. What I was going to say is that I do approach them differently. Mainly, as I mentioned earlier with my short story, I do a lot of point form work, mainly on the setting first, descriptive stuff. And I concentrate on that, finding like descriptive phrases, poetic lines, stuff like that. Then I look for a quirky character to add in there. And by quirky, I mean something unique, something that you're not going to see in everyday life, but you know somebody in your family that has some odd things that happen to them and they do a lot of weird things, right? If you don't, use me, I don't care, whatever. But for novels, I tend to concentrate more on what I would call plot, the conflict within the plot, and then the characters as well. So I do more of an outline for that, which is like, it's almost like saying this happens and then this happens. And then I might shift them all around and juggle them, but it's more of an outline and not so much of a point form, trying to figure out short fiction. So for me, when I approach the short story, I know that I can do a short story within a week to a month. A novel takes me freaking years and I'm still not done. So you know that you can get the gratification by doing something short. And honestly, it feels good to be able to be done, submit, and then you're done. Like you move on to the next story. And with a novel, you're just drawn right back in, which is why I said it's nice to take a little break from your novel. It just gives you a little bit more perspective of what's going on in your novel so that you aren't with those characters for a week and then you're back. And you can see little tiny plot holes and that kind of stuff. So that's how I approach them slightly different. So, yeah.
It's kind of like Christmas dinner. You only get to eat it one mouthful at a time.
Exactly.
And I think the idea of looking at something like as a long process can be daunting. I tend to look at the novel as kind of Joe Montana and the San Francisco 49ers. And someone said to him, well, how come you control the ball the whole game and you very rarely lose? And he said, I go short yardage underneath to Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice runs into the middle. I throw a pass to him. And it basically, all he did was 3 yards, 3 yards, 3 yards, 3 yards. And then they'd march down the field the next first down. Eventually they'd score a touchdown. He never thought of the whole field. He thought of the part of the field that he wanted to, just that little short yardage bit that he wanted to sort of capture and take on his own. So I think that you can freak yourself out thinking of the novel as something that's going to basically it's something that could end up unrewarding at the end of a long stretch. And I'd say start working on episodes, so
Mhm.
mouthfuls.
Mhm. Okay, question number 2 says, what gives a short story its power? Is there an essential element?
Veracity. I think I mentioned this, that there has to be an element of truth in it. There has to be an element of reality. I get really, I know a lot of science fiction writers like Robert Sawyer, for example. And Robert says, well, the fiction has to be good. The science has to be exact. But if you suddenly set something somewhere that has no human relevance that you can't get your head around, it doesn't work. And it's the sense of veracity. I mean, the things we know in this world have happened, but they could happen and they could take hundreds of different routes after they happen. And it's this idea that that really what makes a short story is that little kernel of reality, and being able to stick with reality. I get silly sometimes with my short stories, and I find I have to go back and edit them and shake out all the silliness. Why? Because there are some things that are plausible in some minds and some things that are not plausible in other minds. And you have to go back and make sure that there's facts at the root of it. I love writing factual fiction. The story that's been shortlisted for the Carter V. Cooper Prize this year is a story about a very rare color of red called Dragon Blood, and it's basically a true story. But I took a lot of liberties with it. But what it came down to was that it involved a painter. It involved Sir Isaac Newton, and it also involved a huge cover-up on the part of the British Navy, because it involves like a Chinese ship, Chinese junk, making it all the way to Great Britain. And I had to research the names for the oceans and so forth, and all the Chinese words and so forth. And I was in touch with all my Chinese friends about how to name some, the proper names for things in certain dialects. So I think that going back to the question is a veracity is what it's at the core of a short story. But what keeps a short story alive is the fact that it constantly reminds you that it is here.
Gibson, Ned?
Okay, sure. I agree with Bruce on focus and the other things he said. I would add to that what gives a short story the power, and if there's an essential element, it's distilling the ideas down to as few words as possible. One of the key differences with the novels, you don't have room to give a lot of description, etc. What you have to do is do things very concisely. I'm going to give you an example. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Chris de Burgh, singer-songwriter from back in the
Lady in Red.
70s and 80s.
Lady in Red?
Sorry?
Lady in Red.
Lady in Red.
Lady in Red.
Before he became famous on that one, he was best well known for Spanish Trains. And if you're not familiar with that, Google it, look on YouTube and listen to it. It's about the Lord and the devil playing poker And instead of chips or money, they're playing for souls of the dead. And there's another story, song story, because his are mostly stories. Lady in Red is more of a love story. I don't consider those real stories. They're really good, but the ones that are the stories and the short stories, the painter, the first paragraph or stanza is, I'd like you to meet my last queen over there, large as life. She's been hanging there for almost a week, my poor late wife. Now, in those 25 words, he's conveyed that the protagonist is the husband, that his wife is dead, that, well, is she really hanging there? Not sure. Large as life, though, and that he regards her as a queen, whether that is he puts her on a pedestal or because she wants to be treated like a princess or a queen, we don't know. In the story, the husband, at the insistence of his wife, hires an artist to paint her. He becomes very jealous about the relationships and their late night walks in the wood. The police arrive one day and inform him that she is dead. And he insists it's the painter. He's the one. But they can't question the painter because he's disappeared. So the mystery is never solved. This is an unsolved mystery story or murder story, which most readers don't like. They want to know who did it. But he's brilliant in his use of words. And this is it's around 250 words, including the chorus, which is repeated words. And yet that story is complete. Now I'll take you back to the first line because it shows how important the placement of just certain words or phrases are. Because, yeah, we don't know if he killed her because of his jealousy and then maybe killed the painter, or the painter ran away because he was afraid, or did the painter kill his wife? But there's one word, and you have to go back and read it again. It took me twice reading the lyrics. I'd heard the songs 100 times, I never caught it. I'd like you to meet my last queen. That word is last. That one word opens up a whole realm of possibilities. How many other wives did he have? What happened to them? And that's, I think, where the power of the short story is. When the author, and I'm not a master at this, I got a long way to go. But I like to hope I hit the nail on the head at some times in some places. It's just getting that writing down to the point where that phrase or that special word just opens up another total avenue to the story, or provides a level of emotion for the reader that takes them to a different place. So for me, that's certainly one of the places where a short story gets or gives the power.
It's also Robert Browning's poem, My Last Duchess, if you want to look it up, that seems to be at the heart of the lyrics, but it's called My Last Duchess. It was by Robert Browning, and it turns up in things like Norton Anthology of Major British Authors and so forth. It's yeah, I remember going through it as an undergraduate and thinking, oh, okay, yeah, wow, this is great, yeah. But it is, it's like basically this is Duke is saying that's my last Duchess on the wall. So I think he's altered it a bit, so.
For me, I believe the short story gets its power from two different things. From one, I think it's the voice of the author and the writer. And I know that, for instance, if you're writing a short story for a contest, you got to remember the judge is seeing at least 100 other pieces that come in. So your voice has to be unique, quirky, different from the other 99. So I get the feeling that if you, like, let's say I love Lee Child and he wrote a great short story, but for me to mimic him is not going to get me anywhere, because Lee Child's Lee Child and he writes well. And for me to just try and do that is not going to get me anywhere. So what you have to do is just be yourself, write like you, because you're unique and you can write like no one else in this room. So use your voice, and the judge will, pick you out of the crowd. The second thing I wanted to say was that the power comes from introducing your character to a point of, so that the reader can relate to them. Like they can be an ordinary person, like a little 12-year-old, like the one I was just talking about, but then you give him reasons to either like him or not like him. And then you provoke some, evoke emotion from them, and sympathy, empathy, anger, whatever it is you want your crowd to feel, but they need to feel something. And that way it makes your piece memorable. So your judge, your reader, whoever, if it's just your mom's going to tell the hairdresser, she's going to tell everyone. But the stranger who's reading it, if they have that feeling, like I received a message just this week from a widow about that story I just read to you. A stranger, she doesn't know me at all, and she wanted to tell me how much the story meant to her and how much it would affect her thinking about her own children, because she thought that she was the one hurting the most, but then she realizes that she's not the only one hurting. They're going to hurt in different ways. They may not show it, but they're hurting. And so she was thanking me for writing the story and how emotional she was about the story. To me, I'm like, oh my God, like that was like, it was emotional for me. So I just know that that's something that I was kind of proud of, that I actually managed to do that. That was like a lucky thing for me. But, I'm just saying that it's a good way to get some power in your story, be quirky, and get the emotion as best as you can.
Absolutely.
I sort of, I guess my concern is that that one of the things that's often said is the necessity of finding your voice. I love to walk into the heads of my characters. In a book called Down on the Ground, or was it Feast of Brief Hopes, a couple of books ago, that I saw this character, this kid in my mind, and he was autistic, and he kept wearing Pittsburgh Pirates baseball caps. And I thought, isn't that cool? Why does he wear the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball caps? And so the entire story is told in his voice. But he turns out he's a math savant. And if he feels as if he takes his hat off, the whole world of all the numbers in the universe come flooding into his mind. And so that was a kind of a challenge, but it was really an entirely different experience. And I think that yes, you have a voice that you have, but then I would say listen to your characters as much as you possibly can, engage them, get into their heads, walk around inside their heads, get to know them, talk to them. My wife catches me talking to people all the time, and she's like, who are you talking to? And I think she's going to lock me up one day. But the point is that she sees me sitting there talking. I said, I'm talking to this character. And one of the stories that was long listed for the Cooper Prize this year was about a South American writer who just was a horrible womanizer and pompous and everything like that. And but it's about his funeral and about watching him die and then walking after the coffin and so forth. But the story is not about me. I'm just describing things as omnisciently as I can. But the story is about it's not about him in the end. It's about his daughter, who writes a poem that gets published in a small newspaper. And when she's gunned down accidentally by the drug cartels in the streets, she becomes almost like a saint because of what she said in her poem and so forth. So I find that that it's useful to have your own voice because most of the time it's a good home gear to be in. But at a certain point, you have to empathize with your characters. And that empathy starts with, slipping inside their minds and, and basically looking at the world through their eyes too.
Well, just one point. When I said voice, I didn't really mean my voice. I'm going to talk about different characters, but what I meant was when you read a piece from me,
Yeah.
that I wrote it. And when you read a piece from Sean Cosby, you know that Sean wrote it. You can tell without even seeing his name, the style, the words choices, everything, who wrote the piece. So the characters all have different voices. Yes, I agree. That is correct. But
Yeah.
I was talking about the voice of the actual.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is. Okay, let's see, what do we want to talk about then? What is the difference between flash fiction, short stories, and the novella? Which do you find more challenging to write? Did we already kind of touch on that? We did. Okay, try a different one. How are short stories technically different from other forms? Kind of did that too. Okay, next. Do you have a favorite short story or a favorite short story author that is not you?
I love a story by Graham Greene that's called The Innocent. And it's a very, very short story. It's about maybe 4 or 5 pages long. And it's about a man who basically in London goes and picks up a prostitute and he doesn't know where to take her for like his fling. So he takes her back to the hometown where he grew up, where he hasn't been for years. And then he leaves her in the bar at the pub where they're staying. And he goes walkabout and he finds that a message that he put in a hole in the fence in the hope that the first little girl he fell in love with, and this was when he was a child, that she would have noticed the message. And it's a very, very short, poignant, very short story, but it's called The Innocent. It's by Graham Greene. And the thing Greene does that I love is that he not only narrates events, he throws in his 2 cents worth of exegesis or explanation or editorialization, which I find very useful, because you can tell what's making his mind work and so forth. Yeah.
Okay. Before I answer that, I just want to mention one thing I should have mentioned before when I held up that picture of the sculpture. I don't think I mentioned that was by Toronto artist Sally Thurlow. And also she has given me permission, kindly given me permission to use that in my book. Each story will have an image at the beginning of it, and that will be in with that particular story. So favorite short story? Well, I put down 4 because I couldn't make my mind up. The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, precursor of the Hunger Games from 1940. The Necklace by French author Guy de Maupassant, probably saying that wrong. Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl, not a children's story, but an English tea garden type mystery, is fantastic. I just love that one. And Autopsy Room 4 by Stephen King, if you want to be on the edge of your seat. Those are my
Okay, I
top
have
4.
2. One's a guy, one's a girl. So the guy is S.A. Cosby, known as Sean. It's The Grass Beneath My Feet. And the first line of that is, anyone who tells you that they don't mind going to jail is a goddamn liar. So I love that. And second is a girl from New York. Her name is Lauren Holmes, and she has a book of short stories called Barbara the Slut and Other People. I read that in January 2016, and I still think about every single one of those stories. They were that good. The end. Okay, done.
And part B?
Open mic. We're done.
Oh,
Drop.
Okay,
Let me
sorry.
just move out of the way here.
Can we lift the cord up, please? Over your head. There we go. Yes, that was great. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, sorry, just to tell you, we're just gonna set up again so we can move on to the open mic. So thank you to our panelists. That was great, as with all our panels, so. Bruce is just trying to sabotage us here. As with all our panels, we could have gone on for a lot longer than that. So does anybody, do you want to run the open mic?
Sure.
Okay.
Would you mind if I got some dinner? I haven't eaten all day. So.
Sure, go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, thanks. It's been great. Thank you.
Are
very
you
much.
coming back, Bruce?
I'll leave my mic on mute and maybe I'll be.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Bruce.
Okay. Okay, got it. Okay, got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I have a stool this time. Okay, so open mic is going to begin. We give each other, or each open micer 5 minutes. So do we have some people in the audience here? Excellent. Okay, so lady at the red hair at the back. Please come and introduce yourself and share your work. Unless you want this.
Hi, my name is Kiana Scott. I'm 22 years old. I'm a self-published author. I published my first poetry book in 2020 called Life in Black and White. In 2020, I also made history in the sports world, hockey specifically.
Yeah, baby.
I made history as the first OHL scout, female OHL scout. And today I wanted to create something with both my passions, hockey and poetry. So here we go. They call it history, like the glory has come and gone, but my journey has just begun. It is a history of making a change, creating a culture, a community, and a unity, generationally within the arena, across the ice, and in the stands for women. Because the game of hockey has always been great, but with women, it is so much greater. I'm driven and focused, I'm visibly composed. One of the youngest in my industry, I stay humble, loyal, and disciplined. I'm dedicated to my growth, committing all my time and effort because my team deserves nothing but greatness. To hoist the cup in the air and be showered with champagne, to celebrate with their families and brothers, it's a feeling like no other. Determined, fearless, resilient, the characteristics we hold as women that call hockey home. We are determined to bloom in an industry predominantly male. We fear nothing and no one. We are free to speak, think, and move, but it's our resiliency that binds our beings in order to walk tall and stand above. I am the present, but I'm also the future of the game women can call home. Okay.
So hello, my name is Valentine. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay, good. All right. I used to be a regular at Word Up back when it was at the Unity Market, but I've been away at college studying animation for the past few years, and I came back and the Unity Market's gone. But I'm so glad it's here at the library now. So over my years being away at college, I made a lot of self-discovery. I was away from an environment that was religiously and spiritually abusive, to be frank. And so I was free to, while I was away, I was free to discover my queer identity and fully embrace myself. And so these two short poems I'm going to share are kind of about that self-discovery. Okay, so this first one is called Self-Worth. Focus on the family. Oh, what a calamity. The boys are homosexuals. The girls are individuals. The wives are disobeying because they're so sick of playing this twisted game of house and their louse of a lazy spouse. Tell me, Father, if you think you know, how shall I learn? How shall I grow when all that I know is a no-go? Heaven's darker than the works of Edgar Allan Poe. It's not the second coming, you ignoramus, it's my rebirth, because I'm taking back my power and I'm taking back my self-worth. Not worried about my time left on this earth, because I'm taking back my power and I'm taking back my self-worth. Turn my city into salt, but that's not gonna halt my true self, my new beginning. When I sin, I'm really winning. My womb doesn't bleed for babies I don't need. I was made for revolution, not bodily pollution. Neither man nor woman, I'm an absolute omen. My pronouns are a threat and a nightmare you can't forget. It's not the second coming, you ignoramus, it's my rebirth, because I'm taking back my power and I'm taking back my self-worth. Not worried about my time left on this earth, because I'm taking back my power and I'm taking back my self-worth. Hold a gun up to my identity, but you can't kill my serenity. Hold my name hostage, but you can't salvage this truth from the old ways. Now you could search for days. No woman in my brain, I left her back on the train. Take me to church, but you can't undo the research. Can't put a limit on knowledge. Don't care if it is sacrilege. It's not the second coming, you ignoramus, it's my rebirth, because I'm taking back my power and I'm taking back my self-worth. Not worried about my time left on this earth, because I'm taking back my power and I'm taking back my self-worth. And the second one, thank you. The second one is called Mourn Not for the Unborn. I'm made of flesh and made of bone. This blood of mine is mine alone. Judge me not and do not glare. A child I care not to bear. Unburdened I shall always remain. The sheath shall not carry the stain. My womb bleeds for the unborn, yet I don't cry, I do not mourn. The curse of life, it ends with me. No cabbage patch in my belly. My fleshy peaks shall not erupt. No milk and honey. Am I corrupt? This vessel carries but one soul. I shan't be poisoned by the pole. Thank you.
Nobody live and in person. Does anyone on Zoom have something to share with us? I can't see everybody. I gotta get my glasses. That, Rosanna. All right.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to read a story, an excerpt from a story called The Hawk from my recent publication, Pigeon Soup and Other Stories. Just a prelude, it's a story that contains elements of magic realism, and it's written from the viewpoint of well, with the character being a young child and reminiscing about his nonna, his Italian grandmother. And it's I'm going to skip the first part and go straight to the child. And in the story, like, I don't say whether the child's a boy or a girl. So and it's like I'm addressing the child. Your mother sometimes scolded her mother, your nonna, for telling you old-fashioned stories from the old country. She would tell you tales of Zingari and Ubabao, gypsies and the boogeyman, who would gleefully snatch you if you wandered too far or disobeyed your parents, and then raise you as their own. One of the stories you kept asking for was the one about Il Falco, the hawk. Your nonna would get a gleam in her eye, set you in her lap, and wrap her black shawl around you both before lowering her voice to almost a whisper. The hawk was the size of a man, she said, a hulk of a creature that heralded ill luck, or even, at the very worst, a death in her village in the old country. It was both feared and admired, feared for its craftiness, its stealth, its predatory instincts. admired for its effortless grace while gliding, its its regal bearing and stillness, the immensity of its wingspan. One night, you caught sight of it. You saw it swoop across your bedroom window, and in your pajamas, you tiptoed across the linoleum floor and went outside for a better look. For a moment, you felt awe as you stared at its statue-like form, but when you took in a breath, it swiveled its head to pierce you with a gaze icier than death. It saw you there in your yard, near an oak tree behind which you had instinctively sequestered yourself. You didn't hesitate to see what it would do. You had no intention of being attacked by that menacing creature. You imagined its sickle of a beak slicing into your eyes, as it had apparently done to a cocky observer in Nonna's village. No, you didn't wait for its claws to disengage from the time-weathered shingles, sending some of them clattering to the ground before priming itself for flight directly towards you. Horror-stricken, you had recently seen Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds at a friend's house. You willed your body into motion. The expansive lawn between the back door and the oak tree that protected you seemed a mile long now, with that black hulk in the air batting its glistening wings. You willed your leaden feet to lift, to propel you to the safety of the porch, but the warrior cry it emitted flew inside the cavity of your chest, chilling your heart and the blood in your veins. You feared for your life then. You wished you could take back your brazen belief that you could share space with the hawk and not pay the price. Thank you. I also want to just quickly mention that I just found out about 3 weeks ago that Pigeon Soup was a finalist in the Best Book Awards in the short fiction category.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Lots of claps over here. Do we have anyone else who has a short story to share? Nope. Okay, well, I've got a portion of a short story to share, which I'm gonna get my stool back. And where is she? Sorry, I'm just trying to. It's funny we have to do the spotlight thing tonight. Not behaving. That way I can. Okay. There we go. All right, so this is a story that I'm kind of still developing. It's kind of just the first half. I have all these food allergies, and I was eating a bunch of junk food during the pandemic, and so food generally hates me, but soy makes me hate myself. So I got into a really dark, depressed, like it really makes me depressed. So I got in kind of a dark place where I was, thinking back on some of the losses I've had, and I was thinking about all the stupid things I've done in my life. And I really went through all of the stupid things. And it made me want to be able to go back and kind of start again. And that's where the story idea came from. So it's still untitled. I'm just going to give you kind of the first half. I lived my life filled with more regrets than a bird has feathers. I could hear myself wrestling with them many a sleepless night, though it may have been my tinnitus. This night I prayed. I prayed through the pain that came from the black hole of loss and remorse running through my solar plexus. With tears and deep emotional conviction, I meditated on what I would do differently. And I woke in a different bed. They say you can never go home, but there I was in my old home, in my own bed, Star Wars comforter with matching curtains, with my orange sleepy cat spread across my pillow, his six-toed paw on my nose. best dream ever. I wrapped my arms around George and pulled him close. He snuggled in for a minute, then wriggled away to lay at my feet. I sat up to witness the black sky outside begin to turn azure. The green light on the alarm clock blinked 6:13 a.m. An alarm clock? I hadn't used one of those in a long time. It's family day, I said to myself. February? Do we get that day off now? When is it here? I rummaged through my purse and reflexively sought my cell phone, to no avail. I heard movement upstairs as I found my old daytimer, except it was new. George jumped off the bed. He saw an opportunity for food.
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 15 minutes. If you
Well,
are
I better
borrowing
hurry
any
up then.
materials, please take
I don't know if you
library
heard
items
that.
to the student's desk or self-checkouts at this time.
So I rummaged through my purse and reflexively sought my cell phone, to no avail. I heard movement upstairs as I found my old daytimer, except it was new. George jumped off the bed. He saw an opportunity for food, so pawed at the door until he got it open. Such a smart boy. My calendar displayed 1996. OMG. Wait, OMG isn't going to be a thing for years yet. No LOL, no TMI. Shit, 1996? My schedule showed I'd already started the entrepreneurial program. A life changer. I already had lost my job. My boss was a repressed, angry man who horrified me anyway. I looked around the room for my cell phone again and took a deep breath. This could be liberating. Try just to go with it. I got up to pee, then washed my face with cool water. Her footsteps stomped above in the kitchen. My hand started shaking. Stop, God. It had been so long since I'd seen her. I ran my new hair pick through my giant hair. I'd forgotten how big hair was and looked closely at my fresh young face. Not a wrinkle. No hardened features, no scowl lines on my forehead. I stepped back and stood straight in front of the mirror. My stomach was flat, almost sunken. What mania made me think I was fat and ugly? Seriously. If this is real, how long do I get to stay? I pulled the skin around my eyes. Taut. Surprised, I looked at myself and didn't see a stranger. It was the real me, the way I looked and felt in my dreams. Back then, in my 20s, with next to no self-esteem, I had been scared of what lay ahead. I couldn't admit fear to anyone, most especially myself. At 52, in 2021, I suffered and struggled enough in life to know I could do it, whatever it was. And I didn't need to be skinny, and I didn't need to have the highest hair. I laughed to myself. I straightened my goofy blue zigzag jammies, shook out my arms and legs, and walked gingerly upstairs. Mom was sitting in her spot in the middle of her love seat knitting. She had a steaming cup of coffee in front of her and some comical animal montage show on the TV, a big 3-foot deep plastic box. Man, TVs were big. She'd freaking love flat screens. I stood on the stairs below, watching her knitting and giggling to herself. It had been so long. Good morning, she said. You're never up this early. I continued to the top of the stairs into the living room and glanced over to her bright, steely gray eyes. I couldn't sleep, I said. I smelled the fresh paint. My cousins must have just redone the cabinet doors. I have missed this place. I grabbed a banana and sat on the full-size couch beside her. Mom's wool was lumped on one side, her crossword books piled on her other. She sat knitting one of my favorite sweaters, the bulky blue one that matched my jeans. I thought I might cry at how full of fuzz it was from the washing machine. She'd be so pissed at me. Mom looked at me sideways, then giggled again as a kitten on her show jumped to a table but missed. My George and her big fat cat Satan finished crunching on their dry food and joined us. George batted at her ball of wool. I patted my knee and he jumped up, pushed his bushy orange face in mine, then crawled on the back of the couch. I have missed you so very much, my baby, I said to him. You lazed around all day with him yesterday. What's up with you? She looked over her reading glasses. You're never up this early, and you're sure as hell never sit with me in the morning. I nodded, forgetting that sharp look in her eyes and the shape of her doubting brow. I didn't know her face anymore. That's what started this whole thing. I had forgotten almost everything about her. What would she think of who I'd become, of my choices? Thank you, guys. Yeah, and thank you guys. Thanks to all the Word Uppers who showed up this evening, in person and on Zoom. And thanks to our short panel, our panelists, our short story writers tonight, the two Bruces and Lori. Lori, the other Bruce. Yeah, I'd also like to thank the library for hosting us, and Czech Energy for hosting the Zoom. Our next Word Up is January 13th. We have nothing booked yet because things are still so up in the air, but look to our website, wordupbarrie.com, for more information, and our Facebook page. And we look forward to seeing you next year. So thanks for making 2021 great for us, and a really good send-off event for our last event, 2021. So thanks very much.